Hi, history students. This is Mrs. Duroko, or at least it's my voice. I'm sorry I can't show you my face on this video because I'm in the mountains in North Carolina and the internet is a little bit sketchy. And if I try to record in a streaming way, I'll probably just get bumped off right in the middle. So I'm going to do a screen recording. We're thankful to this substitute. Please say thank you to her on your way out. Good job, those of you who said your presentations, who did it today or Tuesday. I'll grade those and you'll be getting feedback on those soon. Homework. There is a test next Thursday. Please review the study guide that's going to be sent to you by email, and I'll have copies of that study guide on Tuesday. Bring to class any questions you have. For homework, I expect you to study through your note cards 2 times before next Tuesday. Front to back to front, go through 2 times. I also want you to read lesson 14 on Constantine and do these note cards. There are 6 of them, and though it's a relatively short chapter, it's an important chapter, and it's the last thing that will be covered on our test. Speaking of test, let's look at the study guide. The study guide for test 1. Starting off, the test you need to know has fill in the blank, multiple choice, matching, short answer. Most importantly, study your note cards. The information you need to know is on those note cards. If you are expected to know a date, it will be on those note cards. You should have been writing in class or correcting them in class. I will, however, send you on Google Classroom later on, not right now, but I'll post up the note cards so that you can check them, but not until, again, later on. Right now, you're going to be studying those note cards, and most of the test questions will come from them. But in addition to the note cards, you need to know the information on the handout that has blanks, and it's called Early Church Martyrs. You need to know, specifically on this one, you need to know the information that's in the blanks. So you should understand the questions essentially as they're written. Make sure you also know what the words mean of the Apostles' Creed, particularly the words I defined for you. That's just a few things, but it's good for you to know those. Now, you are going to have a discussion question, at least one, maybe more if you're older. If you're a 6th grader only, you can count on having just one discussion question, and 6th graders have a special accommodation that they will know the question ahead of time and will be able and allowed to work on it, to organize it, structure it, and have parents peek at that and help with organization and flow and help make sure that you've been thoughtful and edit it well. So if you would like to do it ahead of time, 6th graders, you can bring that completed discussion question in a signed envelope to class on Thursday when your test is given. If you choose not to do it ahead of time, that's fine. You can do it in class when the test is being given. There will be time for that as part of the test. What is the discussion question? Well, this is a discussion question for all of you. And let me say first before I say this, because sometimes 6th graders don't understand this since you haven't had middle school tests before, but a discussion question should be answered in a paragraph form. The first sentence of your discussion question should restate the question. And then you need to make sure you specifically answer the things that were asked of you, and you do need a concluding sentence. So that does not mean that these points underneath the discussion each require one sentence. They might require multiple sentences, but that's the way a discussion question is oriented. Here's your question. Discuss the importance of the fall of Jerusalem, especially the destruction of the temple. Make sure to answer these questions as part of your paragraph. What happened to the temple in the fall of Jerusalem? Why was this such a big deal for the Jews? what different perspective did the early Jewish Christians have about the temple's destruction? Explain that. All right, 7th and 8th graders will have one more short discussion question that's not given to them ahead of time. That is all you need to know right now to start studying for next week's test. All right, here's the next thing that's new for today. Map number 2. Map number 2 is North and Central America, the countries of North and Central America, with just a couple of bodies of water thrown in. So let's look up here. At the top, this is Greenland, Canada, the United States. You know, we live right here on the United States. Mexico is our closest neighbor. And now here in Central America is where you have multiple countries that are close together. Guatemala, Belize, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, Panama. Now, Panama, that's a really interesting one. If you've ever heard of the Panama Canal, look, the skinniest place in Panama where they built the Panama Canal, that skinniest place was 100 miles wide. And that is why the Panama Canal was built right there, so that boats that were coming from here could go through and come over to this side and keep going, so they would not have to go all the way down and around the very tip of South America. So Panama is right here. And then I want you to know Colombia, even though it's in South America, and it will show up on your South America map, I want you to know that Colombia is the connecting point for Central America, because that's going to help you when we get to the South America map. Right here, the Bahamas. There are a series of islands that are close to Florida. Cuba, which is a very storied island that America has had a contentious relationship with, especially when it was under communist rule. And it's, again, you can see it's very close to our country's border. Haiti, that you may have heard of because of some really natural disasters they've experienced. The Dominican Republic, which it's not that it didn't get hit as badly, but it's not as poor of a country, I think. And so maybe it didn't get destroyed in quite the same way, because a lot of times destruction from these tropical storms has to do with how well the buildings are built and whether or not they're held to higher standards. In our country, we have very high standards compared to a lot of these countries. Jamaica. You may know people from Jamaica. You can see that if they came from, like our friends who live in Virginia that are from Jamaica, it's not far, but it's a world apart. Puerto Rico. I put Puerto Rico in here, though you know it's not a country, don't you? Do you guys know that Puerto Rico is American? It's an American territory. So Puerto Rico, which is on the other side of all of these other places that are actual countries, Puerto Rico belongs to America. And then you can see the two bodies of water, the Caribbean Sea and the Gulf of Mexico. The Gulf of Mexico right here. That's what a gulf is. So we'll go over this more. I just wanted you to have that set to you. And then I have a game that I'm also going to put on Google Classroom. You are definitely going to need to check Google Classroom for all the fun stuff I'm going to upload. But a game that you can play that will help you to practice these countries. The game doesn't have, I can't remember, it doesn't have a couple of things in there. I think it doesn't have the Gulf of Mexico. It doesn't have the Caribbean Sea. It might not have Greenland and Colombia, but it has most of them, and it'll help you practice. All right, we're going to go now to the lesson on Diocletian. So get your note cards out, make sure you're correcting them, and make sure you're catching the extra stuff that I'm going to be teaching you about Diocletian. Starting right here with the first question. How did Diocletian become emperor? So look on your back and let's check this. He became emperor when the army voted him to be emperor after he worked his way up in the ranks as a popular soldier. So you're already getting a picture of Diocletian here. He was not the son of an emperor. He was not somebody who had it just handed to him. He worked his way into being an emperor. He was a very motivated person. What was the first thing Diocletian did to reorganize the Roman Empire? Well, the very first thing he did, this was quite unusual, is that he split the Roman Empire in two, and he brought another man to help him rule half the empire. Now, if you did ancient history last year, you might recognize this model because this is the way that Rome started as a republic. The Roman Republic had the idea that no one man should have all the power. So from the beginning, there were two rulers. Diocletian did that. He brought another person on, and then eventually there were four people. But when he did that, he was not acting in the way of a republic. So I want to show you where this is, but first a map of the whole world so you can see that when I zoom in, I'm zooming in on this part right here, the Mediterranean Sea. So now I'm going to show you a close-up map, but it's right here. It's that area. So of the close-up map, you can see from the red and the purple that when Diocletian split the empire, he actually split it like fairly evenly, straight lines, so that he would be ruling one side and the person he brought on would be ruling the other side. How did Diocletian divide the Roman Empire even further than that? Well, he subdivided each half, first into 4 parts, and then altogether into 120 provinces. Now's a map that you can look at. It's color-coded, and you can see Constantius had this area. You can tell Britain was part of the Roman Empire at this point. Maximian had all of the green area, which was pretty close together, because the Mediterranean Sea is how they got across. And then in this pink part, Galerius had that. And the purple is where Diocletian was ruling. It says up here as Augustus and as Caesar. The Augustus was the higher ranking, and then the Caesar was the next down. But they were all 4 sharing power. So, if you remember back in history, we had the Grand Roman Republic that turned into a Roman Empire. But the Roman Empire had a vicious cycle of usurpations and assassinations. I think you know what assassinations are. When people knock off other people, kill them to get their spot. But usurpations is also when people sort of take out from under a person, take out and get the power from them. This was a constant theme in the Roman Empire. Diocletian's reforms stopped that cycle, not permanently, because the next person that you'll be reading about, Constantine, went right back to consolidating power so he could be the ruler of all of the Roman Empire. But Diocletian did stop that cycle in the sense that he, on purpose, divided the power between these 2, then these 4 leaders. He appointed layers, but it wasn't as a republic or as a democracy. These were not elected people. Diocletian still wanted to be a monarch. You know what a monarch is? A king. He still wanted to be the main ruler, and he wanted to consolidate power. But he also wanted Rome to thrive. So he stabilized the empire, delegated power, and the Roman Empire was then subdivided into something that was sort of like states. But the whole point was to consolidate the power of the empire. Keep that in mind, because the next two things we learn about Diocletian, you see, he's always consolidating power. Here we go. What did Diocletian cause when he made more gold and silver coins? What's that called? It's called inflation. All right, inflation. I want you to learn a little bit about inflation. It's good to learn some stuff about how the economy works when you're studying history, because so many things in history have to do with money. So many decisions that people make have to do with money. So here's a little view of this. In the 2nd century, a measure of wheat, here's a picture of a measure of wheat. A measure of wheat cost 7 to 8 drachmas. And here is a picture of a drachma, a Diocletian drachma, which is a coin. But not long after that, in Diocletian's time, the same amount of wheat cost 120,000 drachmas. What in the world happened? How can inflation happen like that? I have 2 videos for you. The first is a short one that just helps you understand the word inflation, and then one that goes a little bit more into the history of it.
In this History Illustrated video, let's talk about the vocabulary word inflation. So right here we have the word inflation. If you were to take off the I-O-N and replace that with an E, you would have the word inflate, as if something was getting bigger or growing. So I'm going to write growing here. And when we're talking about inflation in social studies, we're typically talking about the economy. So I'm going to write that here, economy. And if you're talking about the economy, you're talking about money. So money would be growing or going up. So that might sound like a good thing if you're talking about the money in your pocket, but we're typically talking about the value. So I'm going to write that here, the value of items. And I'm going to give you an example here. So imagine, if you will, that you could remember at some point that you went to go buy a piece of bubble gum and it cost you 1 penny. Now you might pass by a few years later and notice that the price has gone up and it's now a nickel. And it would continue being about a nickel for a while. Then you might notice some several years later that, well, the price is a dime now. The price has gone up for this bubble gum. Another few years later, you might have noticed that it's a quarter. Then possibly one day, 2 quarters, or 3, or 4. The idea of the value going up of items, so the items that you buy would go up over time. This is inflation.
All right, oops, I skipped the second one. Here is the second video, and hey.
Inflation occurs in an economy when there is an expansion of the total amount of money. For example, let's say a society uses gold coins as money. Gold is the money supply. In the marketplace, Billy, who really likes apples, buys an apple from Farmer Jack for a piece of gold. However, one day Billy happens upon a gold mine. He makes himself piles of gold coins. He then rushes to the market and buys 10 apples from Farmer Jack. The money supply of the economy has just expanded. It has experienced inflation. Farmer Jack now has more money and he can use it to buy more goods. He visits the marketplace and buys chickens from Mary. Now Mary has more money too. With her new gold money, Mary would also like to buy more apples. But there is a problem. Billy was able to buy so many apples very cheaply with his new money that there aren't many left for everyone who wants them. Also, since more people have more money and want apples, Farmer Jack recognizes that he is able to raise the price of apples to 2 gold coins. Yesterday, 1 piece of gold bought 1 apple, but today you need to pay 2 pieces of gold in order to purchase an apple. Ultimately, one of the results of an inflation of the money supply is that once the new money enters the economy, prices rise and the purchasing power of money eventually decreases. In an inflationary situation, those who benefit are those who receive the new money first. Because Billy found the gold first, he was able to take advantage of the low prices before Jack adjusted them for inflation. The other people who benefit are those who had taken out loans. For example, George lent Lauren 4 gold pieces before Billy found his gold mine. Lauren then immediately went and bought 4 apples from Farmer Jack. That was when an apple cost 1 gold piece. However, apples now cost 2 gold pieces. Lauren pays George his 4 gold pieces back, but now those 4 gold pieces can only buy 2 apples. George lost out because of the inflation, but Lauren gained. The good news, however, is that because there is a limited supply of gold in the world, Billy will not be able to find a new gold mine every day and inflate the money supply even more. However, inflation can also occur when governments inflate the money supply. For example, in ancient Rome, the Caesars needed to find a way to fund their massive armies and public works projects without reducing their incomes. To do so, they would collect the gold and silver coins the people paid for taxes. They would then melt the coins down, mixing the gold or silver with cheaper, less valuable metals such as copper, stamp the coin with a picture of the emperor, and authorize the coins as official currency. This process is known as debasement. Let's see how this works. Let's say the Roman government originally collected 100% pure gold coins in taxes. They could use these 50 gold coins to pay for 5 centurions for a month. But the government instead took these coins, melted them down, and mixed them with cheaper metals. They can now mint 60 debased gold coins. The Roman government is now 10 coins richer. They can now pay for 6 centurions, or, if they prefer, they can pay for 5 and keep 10 coins for themselves. Initially, everyone is happy. The soldiers have more money and buy more goods from the merchants. The merchants have more money and buy more goods from manufacturers and farmers. The manufacturers and farmers are happy because they have more money, and so on. However, by the time the money gets to the farmers, the merchant has found that the money was debased. To make the same profit as before, he now raises his prices, which makes the farmer's money worth less. They, of course, raise their prices to the merchant. The next time the soldier visits the merchant, the prices are higher and he finds he can afford fewer goods than before. The Roman centurions obviously ended up pretty mad at the government. Unfortunately, this is bad news for all the other people in the society who wake up to realize that their money has lost value overnight. Once prices rise, their gold coins now buy fewer goods than they did before. Essentially, by inflating the money supply, the government has secretly taxed the people, devaluing their money so the government will become richer. If the government's inflationary schemes get out of control and they continue creating more and more new debased coins, it will lead to a situation known as hyperinflation, where prices skyrocket and the money eventually becomes worthless. Since in today's society precious metals do not make up the money supply, inflation happens by other means. People buy and sell with paper dollars printed by the government. Thus, the government does not have to go through the difficult process of debasing coins when it wants more money. It can simply print more dollars. The government can spend its seemingly free money on any projects it wishes. But the money isn't really free. There are no free lunches. Those people who get the government money first benefit because they can spend it before it devalues. However, as the money spreads through the economy and people have more to spend, merchants will raise their prices. Subsequently, those who receive the dollars last will find their purchasing power has decreased. Just like what happened in our Apple story and in ancient Rome, Prices rise, and a single dollar buys fewer goods than it did the day before.
All right, we're going to skip that review and keep going. So after prices started to rise, what other limit did Diocletian put on the Romans? He tried to limit how much money a person could make. You might think, well, I guess that's a way of doing it, but in general, Diocletian's economic policies were a failure. So when I said that he tried to limit how much a person could make and how much they could charge for what they were selling, he actually applied the death penalty to anyone who sold things for a higher price than was allowed. So if you were only allowed to sell a horse for 100 drachmas and you sold it secretly on they call it the black market. That's the off-the-grid secret way of selling things that the government doesn't control. If you sold it for 150 drachmas because somebody was willing to pay you that much and you got caught, under Diocletian, you would be killed for that. He thought that the reason there was inflation is because people were hoarding their money. They were holding on to it, and they were causing the problem. He was wrong. That wasn't the reason that there was inflation in Rome. And the Roman historians who wrote about this said the rise in price got much worse. Finally, after many had met their deaths, sheer necessity led to the repeal of this law. So it did not work for him on this. But some of Diocletian's economic reforms were positive because one of the things he did was to standardize what people had to pay in taxes. You might remember from older history than this that, or even you could remember from maybe Robin Hood, the cartoon, if you saw that. But oftentimes the people who collected taxes would collect as much as they wanted to or as much as they thought they could because they got to keep the extra. But under Diocletian's economic reforms, people knew how many taxes they were going to have to pay, instead of that amount of tax just differing depending on who was collecting it or where you were. And also under Diocletian, the taxes were spread more evenly. When I say they're spread more evenly, typically people who were wealthy got away with not paying taxes, and people who were poor had to bear most of the burden of the taxes. Again, you can think of Robin Hood when you think of that. But Diocletian wanted to sustain a lot more complicated kind of government, and so he did it with a more complicated system of like counting all the people, all the stuff, all the soldiers, and then really working through how to do it. He was very organized, as you can tell, since he even organized his empire in a way where he was in charge, but there were other people helping to rule it. In order to consolidate power, Diocletian wanted to unite the empire in the same faith, getting rid of all Christians and demanding to be worshipped as Jupiter, of all things. He said, worship me as the father of all mythological gods. So his idea for uniting the empire was to make sure that people weren't distracted in their loyalty. And this is really the third thing to know about Diocletian. The first thing is that he organized everything in what was called the tetrarchy, that, spreading out power. The second thing is that he had this economic really dilemma that mostly was botched, but there was some good to it. And the third thing is that he was the worst of all the persecutors of Christians. Again, he was trying to consolidate power in the Roman Empire. So he said, worship me as Jupiter. This right here is a drawing of a temple of Jupiter that Diocletian himself made. And over here on the right, a picture of Diocletian. And generally I point out something strange about the statues, but I just want to point out that I think Diocletian was a pretty nice looking guy, even though he was a terrible persecutor of Christians. Right here on the left, there's just a beautiful temple. But this is what happened. Under Diocletian, the persecution of Christians, it was worse than any other emperor. And he wanted to command the loyalties of the people. He did not want any religion that would take the loyalties away. And he felt like Christianity was getting too strong, and people were really losing their connection to the Roman Empire because their loyalty was toward God. I'm not going to tell you all the stories of all the ways he persecuted people because sadly, you already sort of know them. They're a lot like all the other people that came before him, only worse. But an interesting thing about his persecutions is that he tried to burn Christian scriptures and books. Now, this is interesting because at this point in history, it's about 300 years after Christ, and the church is still not legalized, but in 300 years, the church structures were a lot more developed, and people had really protected the scriptures and grown the body of Christian literature, and many people had given their lives to preserving the Word of God. So here are a few of the quotes. William Stearns Davis, he wrote this. These are some historians and some ancient historians who tell us about what Diocletian did with the books. In the Great Persecution, started by Diocletian, a special effort was made to seize all copies of the Christian scripture in the hope of depriving the persecuted sect of the means of preserving and propagating its doctrines. Look down at the next quote. This was written in 395 by Xenophilus. When the magistrates and a policeman, guided by the apostatizing secretaries of the bishop, came to the house of Felix the tailor, he brought out 5 books. And when they came to the house of Proecitus, he brought out 5 big and 2 little books. Victor the schoolmaster brought out 2 books, and 4 books of 5 volumes each. Felix the perpetual flamen said to him, "Bring your scriptures out, you have more." Victor the schoolmaster said, "If I had more, I should have brought them out." And here's from another source. When they came to the house of Eutychia, who was a Caesarean, the flamen said, "Bring out your books that you may obey the law." "I have none," he replied. "Your answer," said Felix the flamen, "is taken down." At the house of Cadio's wife brought out 6 books. Felix said, "Look and see if you have not got some more." The woman said, "I have no more." Felix said to Boss, the policeman, "Go in and see if she has more." The policeman reported, "I have looked and I have found none." So, very complicated bit of history just telling us that there was intentionally Diocletian was trying to erase Christianity by getting rid of the books, and that is how important books are. So the moral of the story is hide God's word in your heart. That's when you memorize it, just in case you lose the ability to be able to read it with your eyes. But also hide the books from the emperor and don't let him take and seize all the books. That is the end of our lesson on Diocletian, and if you have any time left, I want you guys to pull out your note cards and to study with each other, but always do exactly what the substitute tells you to do. Have a wonderful day. I'll see you on Tuesday.